him a lot, 'cause we got him on the spot. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back.
Hello listeners, and welcome back to On the Spot. This week I'll be looking at the Welcome Back Kotter episode, Mr. Kotter, Teacher. The IMDb summary is, Mr. Kotter is suspended because Mr. Woodman doesn't like his teaching methods. This first aired on November 4th, 1975. Bob Alejandro directed again, and the husband-wife writing team of Jewel Jaffe Rano and Jerry Rano wrote again. The cold opening is presumably set in the morning, since Gabe says it's too bad that Julie went to sleep early last night. But instead of breakfast, it looks like they're eating marble cake. He's not dressed for work since he doesn't have a blazer and he's wearing jeans. So I guess it's the weekend? Maybe it's the afternoon and he just didn't bring up the thing about her going to sleep until now. She flirtatiously asks what he had in mind. Like, too bad she went to sleep before they could make love. He says there was a terrific spy movie on The Late Show. We already know that Kotter likes to watch The Late Show. An Israeli spy had to deliver microfilm to this guy on the Lower East Side of New York, Delancey Street. So that's at least the second reference to Israel in the series. There were two Bernsteins on the directory. A little old man on the first floor peeked through the keyhole when the spy knocked. So he said the password, Mr. Bernstein, the sky above, the mud below. The little old man said, "You don't want me, you want Bernstein, the spy on the second floor." Both Gabe and Julie laugh. The first main scene is set in the classroom. Gabe is sitting, drinking coffee, and reading a book at his desk. His mustache looks shorter compared to the previous scene, which supports my theory that they probably taped a bunch of cold openings and tags in a row and then just assigned them to various episodes. The audience applauds. A character that we'll learn is named Charlie Piper enters. He looks a little like a mad scientist with a dirty smock and something bubbling in a glass which he pours into a beaker. And he's got glasses and balding but curly hair. He's singing that old black magic. Gabe says, "Good morning, Charlie." Charlie says, "Good morning, Gabe." Charlie uses a vaguely Germanic accent and refers to himself as a science teacher, in case we hadn't figured that part out. And Gabe joins in on that accent as they toast to Baron von Frankenstein. Charlie winces after he sips whatever this formula is. Gabe says when Charlie dies, it's going to take them 9 days to beat his liver to death. Charlie sits on the edge of Gabe's desk and says when Gabe hears his news, Gabe is going to wish he was dead. Gabe is getting reviewed today. Gabe, who's been passing out a few light blue papers. Again, they seem to have a lot of light blue paper on the set. To some of the empty desks, smiles. But Charlie tells him to look like a teacher, miserable. So Gabe tries a couple of silly, miserable faces. Gabe says he's sorry. He can't. He's happy. Charlie says it's no time to be happy. When Woodman comes in and looks at Gabe's class, Gabe should tell the SWAT hogs to shut up and study. And presumably this is the first evaluation that Woodman has officially done of Kotter as a teacher. Gabe smiles again, goes back to his desk, and says he's been trying some experimental things in class and they're really starting to pay off. Instead of making the students memorize dates, he's making them think for themselves. For the first time, he feels like a teacher, and he's not going to give that up just because it's review day. Charlie picks up his beaker and says, "Let's hope that Woodman is in a good mood." The bell rings and Woodman asks where Kotter's class is. And recently we had the episode where Kotter wished that for once his class could be in the classroom when the bell rings, and then when they were, it was because they had set up sort of a detective agency to track down Epstein. Woodman tells Piper to get to his class. Piper says, "Yes, sir." Woodman says if he weren't in such a good mood, he'd have both their jobs for this. That is, for Piper not being in his own classroom and Kotter not having the kids in his. Woodman exits. Kotter does a Woodman impression. Charlie laughs and the audience claps. The extras start entering. First Dolores, and then the most recent black female extra, the one with the tightly trimmed hair, who's been in maybe 4 episodes by now, and Glasses Boy. Meanwhile, Charlie tells Gabe he's lucky that Woodman is in a good mood, and he exits. Charlie Piper, who we'll see in the next scene, is played by Arnold Sobolov, who was born in 1930 in New York City. He died in 1979, so not that many years after this, and before he was 50, and his death was also in New York City. He appeared on on the TV show The Defenders in 1961 to 62, and then he did Car 54, The Patty Duke Show, and Kojak, among other shows. After this one-time appearance, he was on Chico and the Man, and in the Mel Brooks movie Silent Movie, he did Charlie's Angels, Barney Miller, another Mel Brooks movie High Anxiety, and so on. And he ended his career with 2 posthumous episodes from 1980 of the public television children's math show 321 Contact. I'll talk about his character more, but I just want to mention that I've been reading book 2 of the Welcome Back, Kotter books, and Charlie Piper appears more than once in that, so perhaps the writer got a hold of some of the scripts from that time and thought that Charlie was going to be a more major character than he is. But yes, at least we do finally meet another of Gabe's fellow teachers. And then the best part of the episode happens. The 4 main sweat hogs and Vertigine enter, and they do a wonderful little fresh-feeling dance number for about 20 seconds. Vertigine is in the middle, and you can definitely hear her sing as if she's keeping the beat, and she tells Kotter to get down. Arnold, of course, is doing his best to keep up with them. The audience and the 3 sweat hogs in the background clap for them. Kotter comes out from behind his desk and does a little of let's twist again because that's his era. Arnold calls him an oldie but a goodie, and then he laughs. The other extras have come in and Kotter says let's get to work. The students eagerly move the seats to the back of the room, so this is definitely a change since the pilot where they were very reluctant to cooperate with him. Vinny assumes that they're going to rap like yesterday. Kotter is happy they were into it. Rap was a 60s term, still somewhat hip speak in the mid-70s. Basically, it means to talk. It did have connotations of a rap session where you would talk honestly. There is a Brady Bunch episode from about 3 years earlier, the one where Greg is suspected of smoking. Mike and Carol have never heard the word rap, and she worries that it's illegal. I remember that there was this episode in the first season of Family Ties, so 82 or 83, where Elise wanted to rap with her children, again in that sense of talking honestly. Although by then, of course, rap had the connotation of rap music. As with boogie, we're sort of in an interesting point in terminology. The students all sit on the floor in a circle. Mr. Kotter says the circle is the oldest form of education. It goes back as far as history itself. I don't know if that's true, but it's a nice thought. And the circle, as with the round table, implies equality. But of course, this is a show where we've got a bunch of extras who never or hardly ever speak. Kotter goes oi when he sits, a little like his father's noise in Basket Case. Going clockwise, starting with Kotter, it's Freddie, Arnold, the black girl, Glasses Boy, Dolores, a white girl I don't recognize from the back, but she's got light brown hair, Cap Boy, red-haired boy, fluffy-haired boy, Vertigine, Vinny, and Juan. So a dozen students, which is typical for this show. Kotter wants them to feel free to talk about anything they want to talk about, because that was the thing about a rap session, that you can be honest and free. Arnold does his ooh-oohs, and he says last night on television he saw The Wizard of Oz for the 14th time. There was a tradition that started in the mid-50s and continued, I think, well into the 80s, maybe even the 90s, where it was an event that the networks, and I think it was between CBS and NBC, like they flipped between the two, would show The Wizard of Oz. I think more around Easter time. That's not to say that it might not have aired otherwise. It was an important part of baby boom childhoods and Gen X. And of course, Arnold, in some ways, is the most innocent. So I believe that he would watch it 14 times. And if he's about 16, then he was doing this since he was a toddler or preschooler. Freddie, as we've seen, is much more cynical, and he waves his hand dismissively. Kotter asks what Arnold thinks The Wizard of Oz was about. Juan is the one who says it was about 2 hours and 20 minutes with commercials, and then he grins, because he's a realist in a different way than Freddie. Freddie scornfully says it was a lot of made-up junk about a lot of dudes in animal suits. Other than the lion, the 3 main Dorothy's friends are not animals. There are the winged monkeys. I'm trying to remember if there are any other dudes in animal suits, but maybe for Freddie, who hasn't watched the movie as much, that's how he sees it. Kotter tells Freddie that they all represented people. Of course, that's an important part of the symbolism of the Wizard of Oz movie and book, is that they represent aspects of people. Kotter says the Scarecrow is looking for brains. Vinny points and says, like Horseshack. Arnold laughs, waves his arm, and says, come on. Like he's not offended. He's just actually kind of flattered and amused. Arnold is hard to insult because he is amiable and has low self-esteem. Vertigine, who's chewing gum as she often does, says that man in that old dumb garbage can suit needed a heart, meaning the Tin Man. Vinny points and says, like Epstein. Vertigine says, right. One looks surprised and offended, so unlike Arnold, he can get very offended. But in the long shot, he's grinning, so maybe there was an edit here. Kotter says the lion needed courage. The students all silently point at him, so he does his Bert Lahr impression, complete with the nog-nogs. I can't do it, but it's spelled G-N-O-N-G. Those weird little noises that Bert Lahr did, particularly when he played the Cowardly Lion. Arnold says, very impressive, Mr. Kotter. Kotter says the point of the Wizard of Oz was that they were all going for something that they already had. They just didn't realize it. And, of course, that is the lesson that Dorothy learns. Benny says, boy, were they dumb. So he feels superior to the characters. Freddie asks why they're going on about an old, stupid kid movie. That ain't cool. Freddie has certain ideas about maturity and cool. It's interesting in this episode, he is dismissing what is basically an Arnold topic because Freddie will be more supportive of Arnold later in the episode. Kotter says it's very important to Freddie, trying to be cool. Freddie says he doesn't have to try. He is cool. And this is something that we've seen in other episodes, that this is part of his self-image. But this time we have Vertigine, who smiles and says, just turn on the lights and Freddie will heat up. So this is his girlfriend commenting on him being amorous. The others woo. And Freddie looks annoyed rather than proud. Like maybe he just doesn't want her to bring up his make-out skills in front of the others. Kotter says it's all right to be cool, but you gotta be a cool something. So you can't just be free-floating cool. You've gotta try for something. Freddie says he wants to build the tallest building in the world. Kotter jokes that he could call it Washington Heights, which is a neighborhood in Manhattan, so another regional joke. Freddie gives him a pity laugh and then says he'll call it the Boom Boom Building, so referring to his nickname. Epstein says he's going to be a restaurant typhoon, and Kotter doesn't correct him. As Woodman enters, Juan says he'll be caterer to the stars. Puerto Rican Jewish delicacies a specialty. I don't know if we ever hear anything about Juan wanting to be a cook again, or for that matter, Freddie wanting to be an architect. Kotter does his Groucho imitation and says, this is Epstein, the refried matzo ball king. So again, the humor of he's a Puerto Rican and a Jew. Woodman asks Kotter what he's doing. Kotter says Groucho, which really shouldn't be a surprise at this point. Kotter says he's trying something new, not meaning the Groucho imitation. He thinks Woodman should watch, and it'll be the high point of his day. Woodman says his day has no high points, which is a laugh line, but it's also really sad. Woodman asks what's going on here. Kotter says they're rapping. Woodman asks, rapping what? Like rapping with a W? He says he'll just stand back here reviewing everything Kotter does, so no pressure. Kotter asks Barbarino what kind of adult he wants to be. He wants to be Marlon Brando. Some of the sweat hogs boo this, but Juan smiles. Reminder that Juan is Barbarino's best friend. And I'm not sure why they boo it. Maybe they think Vinny is a bad actor, or maybe they dislike Marlon Brando. Vinny thinks he doesn't have to go to acting school because he's going to be discovered in a drugstore. Kotter suggests that he'll be wearing a tight sweater, which is a reference to Lana Turner being discovered at the age of 16 while drinking a soda at a malt shop near Hollywood High School. But yes, John Travolta does sometimes wear a tight sweater or tight shirts. In a sense, he was the sudden breakout discovery of the show. Vinny has Juan do a scene with him from The Godfather. Vertigine complains, do we gotta sit through this? So she at least dislikes Vinny's acting, or The Godfather. The first Godfather movie came out in 1972, but by this point, Godfather 2 had come out the previous year. Pretty topical. Arnold, on the other hand, calls it another magic moment in the theater. Vinny rips up a tissue and stuffs the pieces of it in his cheeks, to be like Brando. Juan kneels and Vinny sits in a seat, but he sort of wheezes rather than talks. Juan calls him Don Barbarino and says he's come to ask a favor. Either Hedges breaks for the first time, and he's done a really good job of staying in character, or Juan is just amused continues by how Vinny wheezes what. When Juan repeats it, Vinny wheezes where, so the what where catchphrase. Juan grins, stands, and says it was pretty good. Then he looks concerned when Vinny almost chokes on the tissue wads. Vinny is all right. The class and the audience clap, so even though they were booing this, I guess this amazing imitation won them over. Woodman says this is all very interesting, but doesn't Kotter think it's time he started class? Kotter says this is class. Woodman yells that Kotter isn't using the textbook. Kotter stands and makes another of what I assume is his father's noises. He tells Woodman that in case he hasn't noticed, we sweat hogs, as he refers to them, are forgotten people. So this is definitely an episode where Kotter is identifying with his students. Kotter says that sweat hogs don't get good books. They get this. He holds up a textbook and starts flipping through it. Woodman asks if it's a bad book. Juan says it's the pits, and Woodman reacts like this is some obscure modern slang, even though Irma Bombeck, who was a very square humor essayist who wrote from the perspective of a housewife and mother, wrote, "If life is a bowl of cherries, what am I doing in the pits?" in 1971. So I don't know if that tells you more about ABC or about Woodman or about the 70s. Kotter says that one means it has no relevance to one's life, that it's outdated. Kotter reads from the book that soon the railroad will span the entire country. Texas is the largest of our 39 states. Here's a good one. They predict television. Most of the audience doesn't react, like they don't have much concept of history themselves. Kotter admits he was joking about the first two, but the book does predict television, so that would mean that it came out sometime before, I would say 1939, because of the demonstration of TV at the World's Fair, and actually TV was invented in the mid-20s. Woodman says they were right about television, so that doesn't make it a bad book. Kotter says it's the pits. Woodman gets confused again, and now also indignant. He wants a word with Kotter in the hallway. Kotter tells the class to try to keep the discussion going. He'll be right back. Poignantly, of course, he won't be, but he doesn't know that. Most of the students wave goodbye, but Freddie looks wary, like he knows where this is going. As Woodman takes a sip from the drinking fountain out in the hallway, Kotter admits that his methods are a little unorthodox. Woodman turns and says they're crazy, insane, and nutsy cuckoo. Woodman says he used to teach social studies, which we know from No More Mr. Nice Guy, and he says it's memorizing names, places, and dates. He sings, "In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue." And although I was never taught that in school, I feel like it was still in the zeitgeist when I was a kid in the 70s, so that's somewhat familiar. Obviously, the way Columbus is taught in schools has changed in the past half century. They don't bring it up, but Woodman's way of reenacting war battles could be considered unorthodox. Although, yes, he does mention names, places, and dates. Kotter says that little song about Columbus is nutsy cuckoo. It's reciting, not learning. Learning is a discussion between people, a dialogue. The ancient Greeks did it. So he is showing that although this doesn't fit into how Woodman was trained, Kotter is tapping into an older tradition. Woodman asks where the ancient Greeks are today. Kotter says they're all in a restaurant on 9th Avenue, so reference to Greek food. Kotter says that Woodman himself said it was interesting. Woodman says it's not school. You talk and they listen. That's school. That's the way Woodman taught. That's the way Kotter has to teach. Kotter is really sorry, but he's not going to hurt these kids by following an outdated set of rules, so he feels very strongly about this. Woodman says the school isn't big enough for both of them, so kind of a showdown line. He's bringing Kotter up on charges before the teacher's review board. And yes, this is based on what just happened in the classroom, but you kind of get the feeling that he's been wanting to do this ever since he hired Kotter, or maybe the school board hired Kotter. Kotter says, "You're kidding." Woodman says, "I never kid, Kotter. I have no sense of humor." And we did have him in No More Mr. Nice Guy trying to tell jokes, but not doing very well. And as I said then, he will eventually tell jokes on a regular basis, but they tend to be cruel and sadistic. Woodman says he'll take Kotter's class. He tells Kotter to turn in his chalk. And I wrote, why? Where? Sounding a bit like Vinny myself, but I mean, what is the point? He's going to need the chalk to teach Kotter's class unless he's going to use his own special stash of chalk that we found out about. He says Kotter is suspended. Woodman opens the classroom door and goes in. Gabe says, "That's the pits." There's applause and a snippet of the theme as we fade to commercial. The next rather long scene is set in the room where the review is being held. And instead of it being a whole board, it is one older woman in a suit dress at a big desk. Woodman calls her Miss Riley. She is actually credited as Ms. Riley, but I don't know if that's just an IMDb glitch. And I'll just tell you right now that she is played by Hope Summers, who was born in 1902 in Mattoon, Illinois, and like Arnold Sobolov, she also died in 79, although obviously at a much greater age. She was the voice of Mrs. Butterworth in those commercials. And back in 1951, so when she was about 49, she played Marie's mother in the educational short Going Steady? ? And she did 50s anthology shows like Hitchcock, a mix of sitcoms, dramas, and movies, including Inherit the Wind, The Children's Hour, The Ghost of Mr. Chicken, and memorably playing Dirty Word Scrabble in Foul Play. So she would have been a somewhat recognizable face with a mix of drama and comedy in her background. So it kind of fits that if they wanted to have an older female sort of judge, the casting makes sense for that. Woodman says she'll act as arbiter in this case. And of course, he's not telling her, he's telling that to Kotter and company. The camera pans as Woodman introduces the accused friend, Mr. Piper, who's now in a suit with clashing shades of yellow. The accused, which is Kotter in blue, and the accused's wife, Julie, who's in red. They're all primary colors. I don't know if that was deliberate. And they're sitting at a smaller desk. Julie smiles and says her husband is a wonderful teacher. Looking both embarrassed and infatuated, Gabe says his wife is here for moral support. I won't go into this too much, but this is sort of an episode that is definitely not about their ship and their marriage, but they are pretty cute together. Miss Riley looks dubious, and then she calls Woodman Michael, which I think is the first use of his first name. Whenever she addresses Mr. Woodman in this episode, she calls him Michael while he calls her Miss Riley. I don't know if that means that they have a history together, not romantic necessarily, or if it's just she is his superior and she gets to call him by his first name and he's more formal. But clearly she does know him, while she seems not to have ever met Gabe before. She asks him to read his charges against Mr. Kotter. Woodman says he'll do so with pleasure. He puts on his glasses and stands. He reads from a file that Gabriel Kotter has refused to use the assigned textbook, failed to follow the prescribed curriculum, and furthermore is in violation of Section 3 of the Education Code. And we'll kind of find out what Section 3 is later. He says in addition to that, he does Groucho Marx in the classroom. Woodman takes off his glasses, looks stern, and sits. Charlie Piper stands and tells Miss Riley that he's a character witness. His colleague, Gabe Kotter, is a terrific guy. Miss Riley takes it that Piper has known him for a long time. Piper says, oh yes, 4 or 5 weeks. We are on episode 9. The show had been airing a couple months. I don't know how much time has passed since the pilot, and obviously things weren't airing in order. The wardrobe, particularly for Gabe and Julie, feels more autumnal than summery. Classroom marriage, Gabe was able to sit outside at midnight in his shorts. So I don't know if Piper and Kotter didn't meet the first week or why it's only been 4 or 5 weeks, or maybe they just really didn't get to know each other and become friends until about a month ago. Gabe looks annoyed and Julie looks worried, because obviously that isn't a long time. Piper says Kotter is a great teacher. Miss Riley asks if he's observed Kotter's class, because what is he basing this on? So Piper brings up the incident of the teacher that was arrested in the balcony of a Times Square movie, so implied pornography. He says Kotter is not that man. Kotter sarcastically thanks him and says that Piper just won the award for the best performance by a moral supporter in a non-supporting role, like an Oscar or Tony or something. Miss Riley asks if Kotter students are planning to attend this meeting. Woodman jumps in and says of course not. Kotter students had the nerve to ask him for permission to be here, which he naturally denied. Kotter says this isn't fair. What they're deciding today is who's going to teach those kids, and he thinks they should be part of that decision, which is a good point. And then we get a shot that reveals that Horshack is on a window washer seat, and he's wearing a curly blonde wig and a yellow raincoat. The raincoat makes sense because water's involved. I don't know why the curly blonde wig, other than it leads to a joke in a bit. It could be a Harpo thing, except he's not silent. But as with him wearing a gorilla mask when he and his friends were wearing trench coats, Arnold has his own take on costumes. He signals to be lowered more, and then he looks through the window, grins, and waves. There's laughter and applause. And I think this is the first episode with that kind of stunt. I mean, it's not dangerous, but more than just people walking across a room, which is what we usually get. Juan and Freddie burst through the double doors, dressed as painters with mustaches. They are the Linguini brothers, and of course both have Italian accents. I couldn't quite catch what Freddie calls Juan. It sounded like Luizio, but Juan clearly calls Freddie Guido. Arnold lets himself in through a door that apparently leads out to a balcony. It's not really explained how he gets from washing windows safely into the room. Woodman says this is absurd. What could be more ridiculous than this? And this is one of those things where like, oh, this place is turning into a madhouse, so that we feel like it's a madhouse. So, of course, Vinny enters as a busty cleaning lady singing O Sole Mio, because he actually is Italian, but that's not enough, so of course he has to come in drag. And the audience really likes this. And yes, this is the first time that we get a character in drag on the show. Definitely not the last. Woodman tells Kotter he knows that face. Like, it wouldn't be obvious the moment he walks in. Vinny says, what? Woodman says, that's you, Barbarino. And Vinny says, where? So again, the what, where thing. Kotter asks if Barbarino is in there alone. And that was, I thought, the funniest line in the scene, just because he's implying that Vinny is so chesty that there must be somebody else in there. Kind of like Three Kids in a Trench Coat, but not exactly. Miss Riley asks Kotter if these are his students. Can you imagine if they weren't? They're just these random young people coming in. Kotter introduces his sweat hogs as Mo, meaning Juan, Larry, meaning Freddie, Curly, meaning Arnold, so that's why the blonde wig, and Raquel, meaning Vinny, and yes, referring to Raquel Welch, who was a common punchline on 1970s sitcoms. Kotter asks why they came dressed like this. Vinny says Mr. Woodman said no sweat hogs could be here. It's not like these are amazing disguises. But, you know, that's sweat hog logic. Any excuse to dress up, basically. Freddie says they started doing like they've been doing in class. They started asking themselves questions. Selves, we asked. What can we do to help Mr. Kotter beat this rap? Arnold says at first their selves didn't answer. Juan says that out of nowhere, a voice came into their heads and said go to the library, as he pronounces it. And Kotter's amazed that they went to the library. Vinny says for 3 whole days they looked up legal precedents instead of precedents. That tells us a little bit about the passage of time. Arnold takes out a big red book and flips past Grant versus Richmond, so Civil War joke, and Dempsey versus Tunney. And that's a reference to the long count fight, a boxing match from 1927. The studio audience doesn't seem to get these. I did, but even by 1975. Boxing reference was pretty dated, and maybe they just weren't up on history. And then Arnold refers to Flippo the Seal versus Caesar's Palace. I'm not sure if that's like a parody of Flipper the Dolphin, but it conjures up an image of a performing seal in Las Vegas, and that's a little bit more popular of a joke. Arnold finds Section 3, Subsection A, Paragraph 4 of the City Charter, whatever that is. He smiles and then does a 1-syllable version of his laugh. This paragraph says that any teacher placed on suspension has the right to a public hearing. Arnold grins and closes the book. Miss Riley tells Kotter his students are somewhat offbeat. The 4 of them snap fingers, of course offbeat. There's laughter and applause. Kotter makes them stop. Miss Riley says they may speak if they will keep it brief. And of course there's not that much time left in the episode. Kotter tells Barbarino to take the stand. So he's actually willing to take a risk on having the sweat hogs speak up for him, even though his colleague didn't do a great job. Barbarino picks up a chair and jokes about where he should take it, like taking the stand. He sits it by Woodman, whom he scolds for looking at Vinny's legs. Vinny takes out a note, which he's written on in what seems to be a spiral, because he keeps turning it, and again, it's light blue paper. He wants Mr. Kotter back because he figures Kotter's replacement would be worse. Kotter sarcastically thanks him. Vinny says he ain't through yet. He thinks Mr. Kotter's a pretty good guy about half the time. Not a ringy endorsement, but again, progress since the pilot. Julie verbally nudges him with, and a wonderful teacher. Vinny agrees to that and says, don't let this dress fool you. He really means it. You wouldn't necessarily take him seriously because he's in drag. Vinny stands and struts a little. Kotter thanks him but tells him that Goodyear called and they'd like their blimps back. Goodyear blimps were a big thing in the 70s at football games. Freddie gives Vinny 10 as he makes his way over to testify. He stands, pauses, smiles, and says, "Hi there." But then, without trying to be cool, he says he's just your average student from off the streets, and personally he feels Mr. Kotter is a bad teacher. Then he has to explain to Miss Riley that he means in the hip sense, and she imitates him. Freddie says most teachers ask you a question and they expect you to give the right answer. But Freddie's main man, Mr. Kotter, lets them ask their own questions. Sometimes there's more than one right answer. All those times Freddie was wrong, he was right. He concludes with, "I thank you," and moves the chair even though he didn't sit in it. The audience, Piper, Kotter, and Julie laugh. Arnold comes over to Miss Riley's desk and leans over it. He introduces himself in his usual style. "Hello, how are you? I'm Arnold Horshack." He says, "Up until now, going to school was like being vaccinated. A subject was something you take, and once you had it, you were immune and need not ever take it again. But Mr. Kotter here," and there's a cut to the Kotters holding hands and looking touched, "he's not like that. He really expects them to learn, and it takes a heap of learning to make a boy a man." Arnold smiles and bows. Freddie off-screen cheers Arnold. The audience claps. Julie tells Arnold he's a wonderful pupil, and he looks flattered and embarrassed. So I thought that was a sweet little Julie-Arnold moment. Freddie says, "Hey, my man, pretty good." So like I said, Freddie is more supportive of Arnold than he was in the classroom. One slowly walks over and says he thinks his colleagues express themselves pretty good on the matter of Mr. Kotter getting the axe. So he has grievances of his own he'd like to air. Instead of defending Kotter, he's just going to use this as an excuse to gripe. He unrolls a very long list, and he starts with the cafeteria food. His friends enthusiastically agree. Woodman says this is completely irrelevant, so Juan goes into Chico in duck soup with the irrelevant elephant pun, and Gabe, of course, goes into Groucho, and they even call each other Mr. Ravelli and Boss. I think this is the first time we get that Chico, Groucho, Juan, Gabe thing that would be a recurring thing in the series. Woodman tells Miss Riley that that's a violation of Section 3, that Kotter is imitating Groucho Marx, although it sounded earlier like that was a separate thing from Section 3. Gabe apologizes to Miss Riley. Woodman tells Epstein to take a chair, so Juan tries to take Woodman's. Miss Riley says there's no need to get red and puffy, Michael, which I thought was a rather personal remark. She asks Kotter if he'd like to say anything in his own behalf, rather than on his behalf, and I think it's phrased that way so that Woodman can insist that it should also be in Kotter's own voice, that is, not an imitation. Kotter says certainly, and then he catches himself. He stands and tells Miss Riley he's a teacher. That's what it says on his locker, Mr. Kotter, teacher. So we get the title drop. He says he's teaching a group of kids known as the Sweat Hogs. Contrary to popular opinion, Sweat Hogs are not dumb. A dumb person does not think of a way to make it rain in the gymnasium. And Vinny proudly takes credit for that. I would think it probably had something to do with the sprinklers, but maybe not. Kotter says, unfortunately, normal teaching methods don't seem to work for these kids. If they did, then the kids wouldn't be sweat hogs. They're going to have to survive in the world of the future. If they learn how to learn, they'll be able to survive anywhere. He pauses and then self-consciously says, copies of this speech can be obtained by writing Farkle Press, Brooklyn, because that was a big thing in the 70s and I think into the 80s where you could get transcripts. Kotter feels a little bit self-conscious that he's got kind of soapboxy about his profession. But I mean, he's justified. His career is on the line. The audience, the Sweat Hogs, and Piper clap, and Julie looks admiringly at him. I mean, she just adores him in this scene. She says to Miss Riley, isn't he a wonderful teacher? Gabe puts his hand on her shoulder like that's enough. Miss Riley asks Michael if he cares to say anything before she makes her decision. He thinks his case speaks for itself. Miss Riley says she may not approve of Mr. Kotter's methods, but she does believe in the rights of teachers to teach. She was impressed by the Sweat Hounds, and the four of them correct her with hogs. She's impressed by the Sweat Hogs initiative in doing research to save his job. It seems there is some method in his madness. She says she may seem old-fashioned, but in her youth she was considered radical herself. If the character is about the same age as the actress, so she's in her 70s now, her youth would have been in the 20s and 30s. So I'm just going to have headcanon that she was a socialist. She says she votes to retain him, which seems a little bit odd. Why vote? You're the only person there. And Juan demands a recount, like he doesn't understand what the word retain is. But everyone is happy, except of course Mr. Woodman, who insists that Kotter's methods are nutsy cuckoo. Miss Riley tells him that he taught Kotter, so he should be proud. Like, this is your fault, dude. Own it. She does have one condition. Kotter will have to use the textbook. Kotter says okay. The sweat hogs understandably look betrayed. On his way out, Woodman repeatedly says this is nutsy. Miss Riley tells Kotter she thinks she knows what he's been going through. She was a teacher herself for 40-odd years, probably starting in the 20s or 30s. And then she does her Grouch imitation and says they were 40 the oddest years she's ever known. And she exits to applause. The Kotters embrace, and they look like they're going to make out. She says she'll leave her wonderful husband with his wonderful students. They smooch and then hug even closer. Piper congratulates Gabe and says he's glad he could help, although of course he didn't do anything except say that Gabe doesn't watch porn. He and Julie exit. Kotter shouts that they won, but the sweat hogs look sullen. They think he copped out. They talk about how disappointed they are, and one references the wizard not giving him courage. Kotter says he didn't say how he was going to use the books, so he gives them a posture lesson, and the 5 of them file out of the room with books on their heads. There's applause and a snippet of the theme. In the tag, the Kotters are playing checkers. They're both in jeans, and she's in a check shirt, and he's in a sweater. So again, it felt like it was probably the weekend. He tells her about the last time he went to see his grandmother in Miami. So I don't know if he means the last time ever, or just the most recent. I mean, it's possible his grandmother's still alive, and it's very much a stereotype that old Jewish people would retire to Florida. He says there was a little old lady sitting next to him. So he doesn't talk about his grandmother. That's just the pretext for why he was on a plane. Instead, he's talking about this other little old lady who was wearing a diamond ring. It was the famous Plotnick diamond. It was a beautiful ring, however, there was a terrible curse that came with it. Sam Plotnick. So implying that this woman got jewelry, possibly her wedding ring, from her horrible husband. So another anti-marriage joke, although at least not as dark as the one about his uncle who repeatedly kills his wives. I had a lot of mixed feelings about this episode. I give each of these a letter grade, like in a class, so F- to A+, and I was on the B- B fence back and forth. Watching it the first time through, taking notes, thinking about it, not sure where I wanted to land. I mean, it definitely is not as weak an episode as the previous one, where Juan disappeared because he lost the fight with Todd Ludlow, or Ludlow, as he would say. There definitely are things I like about this episode, but ultimately I saw too many flaws to give it a B. But beyond that, I wasn't even sure if the flaws were a problem with the direction or the writing or the casting. I need to talk about the guest stars. Although it is not their fault, I just felt that they didn't contribute as much as they could have. The Charlie Piper character is pretty much unnecessary. Yes, it's nice that Gabe has a friend and he can kind of joke around with him, but when he comes back as moral support in that scene, he pretty much just makes things a little bit worse. Then he just sits there like a lump for the rest of the scene. I can kind of see why they didn't have him back. Again, not the actor's fault, but they didn't know what to do with that character. I think Hope Summers is fine as Miss Riley. She wasn't hilarious, which she is in Foul Play. She gets the job done, but didn't really add a lot other than, you can speculate on her wild past in the 20s and 30s and maybe now. And then the other guest star, of course, is Verna Jean. This is her 3rd episode. She had that marvelous debut with Classroom Marriage. Then she was basically like an elevated extra in One of Our Sweat Hogs is Missing. And then in this one, she is delightful in the classroom scene and then disappears from the episode. I like to pick a head of the class for each episode, and it's not necessarily a student, but it's the person whose performance I most enjoyed. I'm going to give it to Verna Jean in this episode. I liked her teasing Freddie, and I loved that little dance number that I felt like she was leading. She just once again inhabited the character. She didn't really get a lot to do, but I really loved her and I wanted to see more of her. And I feel like there could have been a way to bring her into that review scene, but of course they just always want to keep it as the 4 main sweat hogs when possible. And she's not as cartoony a character, so I guess maybe they just felt like having her dress up even with a mustache just wouldn't have worked. Yeah, she's the best part of the episode. But I also need to talk about what the other people were doing. This episode is basically 2 long scenes. I mean, there's 3 other short little scenes. It is interesting to see that Woodman-Kotter conflict come to a head and get some resolution. I mean, obviously Woodman's not going to give up entirely, but he at least is not going to get Kotter fired. And this episode definitely has is them talking about their different teaching philosophies, and that's interesting to me. And it's a pretty good Gabe episode because it is about his job and what's important to him, and he does have this personal connection with the sweat hogs, but he's using that to become a better teacher. Here we are at least a month, maybe 2 or 3 months into his first year of teaching, and he's still learning himself. Normally, I love Julie. In a way, I still do love her, but I kind of felt sorry for Marcia Strassman because on the one hand, it's cute how adoring and infatuated she is and how much Julie loves Gabe, and that aspect of him being a wonderful teacher is part of her love. On the other hand, it was a little bit uncomfortable to watch. I wanted more of the sassy Julie that we get a little bit in the scenes where he's telling her a joke, like with one of them, he says, "Did I ever tell you?" And she says, "No, but you will." Compared to some of the other episodes, I didn't feel like Julie really needed, yes, she was there for moral support. Again, I don't blame Marcia Strassman. That may be directing or writing choice. I think that the scene in the classroom generally works. The Marlon Brando thing isn't amazing, but it was cute. Honest fan that I am, I treasured that they were discussing the Wizard of Oz. That was fun, and making it apply to their own lives. And also tell you a little bit about what they see themselves doing in the future. And also we get some little character moments and differences between the sweat hogs and all that. And I like that. I keep wanting to say the courtroom scene, but the review room, school board room maybe. That scene didn't work as well as it should have, and I'm not sure where the fault lies, but it was a drop off to me compared to what was a really fun start to the episode. Besides that, I don't think Julie and especially Piper need to be there at the hearing. It was a little bit too self-consciously, look at us, we're a farce, we're just like the Marx Brothers. Well, in Classroom Marriage, it just felt very organic and fun and lively. This was just, look, Vinny's in drag, Horshak's in a funny wig, Juan and Freddie are doing Italian accents, and it just, trying too hard, I guess. We have to have Woodman emphasizing that, oh, this is so crazy and how upset, and playing against that. It was just tonally off enough. It wasn't a bad scene, but I felt like there was a lot of potential that it just couldn't hit. Again, I don't know if that's the fault of the writing or the directing, possibly the acting, but I felt like everybody was certainly giving it their all. B- is not a terrible grade. It means it's pretty good. I just felt like it didn't live up to potential, and it is one of the weaker episodes of the first 9. But all of that said, there are some really nice little gems sprinkled throughout the episode, especially in the first half, and I enjoyed it enough, but would have liked something more. In a way, they are still kind of finding their footing, even with how the catchphrases are done, and I'm already a little bit, if not tired, at least wishing the Vinny What Where stuff was being done better. But yeah, points for giving Verna Jean some fun stuff to do. And philosophy of teaching. For some reason, they skipped a week. So this one, it aired on November 4th. The next episode would not be till November 18th. And it is called The Reunion. We will see who reunites in that one. In the meantime, look out for the Plotnik curse.
Tease him a lot, 'cause we got him on the spot. Welcome